everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at RHE Podcast. Respect, humility, empathy. Those are the three things that we stress the most. And we want to thank you for joining us today. And thank you for joining me today. So Adam, this is going to be, I think, your third time on the show, correct?
Third time.
So what do you think so far about the overall message of RHE Podcast and your experience with me and the show?
It's refreshing compared to some of the groups you find online.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of aggressive people online,
right?
And it's difficult. I mean, initially I went online to talk to people, and I don't feel that actually the engagement is as I would expect. It's, as I say, quite aggressive. But no, this is refreshing. It's a good place. It's a safe place. It's respectful, and it's what I hope to find online, really. Resulting from that, we met online, so fantastic.
Speaking of respect, I want to wish you the deepest condolences on your loss in Britain.
Sure, yeah, big shock. I was actually driving to a big sort of hardware store with the family because we're still in lockdown, as you know, and we've had my mother-in-law stay with us.
So condolences, double condolences.
Yeah, we were all driving up there, and we heard it over the radio, and it was literally on every station, and it was I don't get hit like that kind of thing often,
Right.
And it bothered all of us.
And
as you know, the Queen's quite old as well, so I mean we've got this to come again soon. It's not easy.
Okay, so I want to spend as little time as this is possible because I'm really not interested in the royal family. But was this the Queen's husband?
It was.
So he's just the king?
No, he's not. He's a duke.
Explain that one to me,
mate. I've been saying this for a long time. He should have been king, but the thing is, the Queen was the king's daughter, so the Queen is. I don't actually know how it works, mate, if I'm honest. But I've asked this question many times. But basically, the Queen's in charge, and the Duke supports her.
So hypothetically speaking, if she would have died and he was still alive, who would have been king next?
It would have been Charles next. Her son.
Her son. So there was no circumstance when this guy who just died would have been king?
No.
Okay, before I burst up
it's only the heirs that are king or queen.
Okay, I really don't want to spend any more time on this, but actually I will ask you this. What was your opinion on the Meghan Markle story that broke?
It was quite disappointing, actually, especially around the time where Harry's grandfather was in hospital. I think
the guy who just died?
Yeah, he's been in that hospital recently, and he's been very ill. So, I mean, they could have probably waited a little longer. And I'm surprised that, I mean, obviously it's his business. I don't want to go into it too much. Mm-hmm. He felt compelled to leave for whatever reason at that time. So that's his business. You can't really fault him for that. Mm-hmm. But the Oprah interview, they could have probably postponed that a few months or maybe even a year.
So first of all, I mean, I want to be very up in front about this, that I don't think there's any circumstance you could objectively look at the royal crown or the royal, they're just people, and not think that if you're only allowed to marry certain people, even within your own family, whether it's cousins or whatever, that there's not a degree of racism in that. So, I mean, that being said, I'm the father of a half Asian child. So if someone were to discuss whether or not my daughter is going to look more Asian or more American, that's fair game, Actually, a funny story there. When my daughter was born, you would never in a million years assume that she was mixed at all because she looked just like her mom. She didn't even look Asian at all. Now she's like a clone of me. It's amazing how much her face is. I think to ask a question about skin color or my daughter's eye color, it's fair game, see my nose is really big.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, my nose is really big. Yeah. My wife's nose is so flat, I can touch it and completely smash her nose shut like that to where she couldn't even breathe. just because Asians don't have a lot of cartilage in their nose. And so I'm in the plastic surgery business. And so what they do is they have a rhinoplasty, and then they insert something to prop up the bridge of their nose right here. Because this is going to sound fake, but I swear, if you look at a lot of them from the side, their eyes will actually protrude further than their nose. So some of them is completely flat. So they don't like that.
Sure.
And I'm not saying it's a good or it's a bad thing. I like the eyes. I like the small slanted eyes. Like it's attractive to me. And my daughter has it to an extent. But to say that if my parents asked about her eyes or her hair color.
It's funny you say that, because when we watched the interview, it almost seemed like Meghan was clutching at straws with this, because as you've just said, if somebody is mixed race or they're having a mixed race child, the fact that the family are going to discuss what the baby will look like, I mean, that's quite a natural conversation. I don't think it's, obviously that you could have that conversation in a negative way. I'm not saying you couldn't, but it just seems to me like that conversation, I cannot honestly believe that the royal family would have that conversation.
Yeah.
From a racist standpoint. I think it was basically a family question that was probably not said in the right environment, maybe, or I don't know. I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy it.
So again, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but that was just an interesting thing. Just because it has, on a scale of 1 to 10, it has a absolute 0. Like, you said you watched Downton Abbey or The Crown or whatever, like, Americans are obsessed with this, right? Like, Americans are, I gave you a little bit of crap about your accent, but I think it's so funny if you tell me your daughter has an accent too. Like, how do children have accents?
I don't know. I think her accent sometimes is better than mine. And because she says certain words to me, and I think, well, I wouldn't say it quite like as British as that. Where did you get that from? That's very odd.
That's funny. When we were talking about, God, you said that you're pretty sure. So I do want to ask you, where do you even, first of all, on a scale of 1 to 7 on the Dawkins scale, where would you land on there? And how would you justify that? How would you justify that?
I'm probably as high as a 6.8, maybe, because I'm 99.9% sure that what we have around us is pretty much it. But I can't know for sure. So so there's always going to be that element of doubt. Otherwise, I could be considered as being what's the word? A smart ass? Is that what you'd say in America?
Arse. We would say arse.
Smart.
So a light year is 6 trillion miles. Okay. So 6 trillion miles across, they say the universe is like 80 million. So try to times 80 million by 6 trillion. Think about that number, okay? So you have that number. It's too big to even fathom how many miles it would be, right? You don't even talk about miles. You talk about it in light years, right? So you have that, and you have the universe is 14 billion years old. So if you're lucky, you're going to live to be 100. Like this bloke was 99, right? He just died. Was he 100? If you live that long and you never leave Earth, you never get to leave Earth. Okay. How would you say with even 0.000% certainty that there is a God or isn't a God? That seems like such a ridiculous statement to say 99. If you're 0.1% sure, I would be impressed. But in a galaxy this big, that's this old, I mean, you're limited to a small fraction. It's like this. Here's the analogy I'll use. Let's say you walk in to see a movie, you have a straw, you look in the straw at the very corner of one frame in the opening credits, and then you walk out and you say that movie sucked. That's what you're doing as an atheist. And so for you to say one way or the other, it seems very illogical to me.
I don't know about that analogy, because what you see through the straw is the same as what, the screen's the screen. So you've seen a part of the screen. So, I mean, I'd say that if you could look at a very small part of space, I mean, surely the rest is pretty much the same, right?
No.
I mean, the screen, you look at one very small part of that screen. The whole screen is still a screen.
So you are right, that analogy is very off. More likely what it would be is that you didn't even get to see enter into the movie screen and see anything. You're still outside, because giving you a whole second to look is actually very generous, because if the day of the universe was 24 hours, 1 second would be 160,000 years. So to say you even have a second would be a ridiculous overstatement. So the point is that, you know, analogies will always break down if we take them further enough. But the point is that you're very limited. You have really no.
I totally agree in that. Yeah, I totally agree. We are extremely limited on what we can see. I think we're quite lucky that we can see what is, you know, millions of light years old, because I mean that's what we're seeing effectively, isn't it? We're seeing something that is.
What is your deconversion story, or was there ever a point where you did believe in God or anything that was supernatural?
100%. Yeah, when I was younger, I went to Sunday school. My mother's mum, she was one of the first female vicars in Britain.
Vicar?
So yeah, one of the very first.
What's that?
Well, you run your own church. Effectively, you're head of the church. So she ran a church in Wales. Okay. You've got to do lots of exams. You've got to obviously dedicate a lot of time to get to that stage. And I remember studying for years for this, and she finally made it, and she was one of the first. Yeah, it was a new thing in the UK for a woman to be able to do this.
By the way, just one sec, sorry to interject, but at some point Donald Trump met the Prince or King of Wales, and he spelled like an actual whale, like WHALE, ALE. Pretty freaking hilarious, man. But he's
a funny guy, mate. He's a funny guy, isn't he?
Whale.
I mean, that's a different conversation, I think, isn't it?
I was wondering if he also met the king of dolphins as well. That would have been interesting. Anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
Anyway,
it's very rude.
So yeah, I was. My grandparents were all religious growing up, and my mum and dad, they went to church. So you know, I went to Sunday school, and I mean, I was in that environment, so I assumed that God existed until a certain age, when I started asking questions and started talking to God, and asking God for things to happen. And you know, as you do as a kid, you pray, and you know, and I think I went through a period in my life where I suffered quite a bit of abuse. At around sort of 7 or 8, my parents separated, and one of my parents' partners was very aggressive, and we would do things like spend days in bed, and you know, it was pretty horrific.
Can't imagine.
I think over those years, I realized that God didn't exist, because, well, I was in hell, and nobody heard me praying. Trust me. And yeah, I think that's when my life changed. And obviously, I've had nothing since then to sway me.
So first and foremost, I'm very sorry that you experienced that. I experienced some stuff in my childhood that scarred me well into my 30s. That some stuff I still struggle with, honestly. And in dealing with this topic, if you listen to the Problem of Pain or Evil podcast we did, the first thing I said was like, look, we got to talk about this sensitively, and you certainly aren't the only one to experience abuse. I mean, what my mom experienced growing up, I can guarantee 1,000 times worse than what you experienced. And she wound up finding God, and but she still suffered from PTSD. She still suffered from depression. She still suffered from addiction that ultimately took her life. So believing in God doesn't like just solve all of your problems, and it certainly doesn't stop pain from happening. I can tell you, Blue, that my life has actually gotten probably 10 times harder since I've been a believer. When I wasn't a believer, it was drugs, sex, partying, lots of money, and not a care in the world. And being a believer, I've gone through some extreme hardships. I mean, there's been days where I was certain I was going to die. I was so sick. And there's days where my daughter almost died because of the mistakes I made as a non-believer. You can listen to the story about the other episode with the other British guy, where I go into the whole details about how my past fidelity literally almost killed my daughter. So there's that. But second of all, with that being said, as an 8-year-old, if you think that you knew that there was a God inside of your bedroom, just think about the illogical, it's a very emotional thought that and I understand the emotional, it's not like I had the same exact thoughts, but there's no logic behind that. So I like to deal with logic and rationality, and there's no logic behind that. We can talk about maybe how that happened, or maybe some of the reasons for pain or suffering, but I don't really see anything close to other than you have hurt feelings. You know what I mean? So that being said, we will come back to that probably later, but you can ask your question now.
I think when people have a message or they're spoken to by God, what I don't understand is, obviously their messages from God, whoever that may be, from whatever religion that may be, I wouldn't imagine would specify what God or who they were or from what religion. Why do people make the assumption when God does speak to them, or they have a sign, or they're convinced in some way? Why do they assume it's of the religion that they, that they're brought up around? I mean, my example, that is obviously a Christian wouldn't become a Muslim one day and say, my family are all Christians, but God spoke to me and it wasn't the one that they're following.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for Isaiah Press. But second of all, sure. That does actually happen. There are Muslims who wind up converting to Christianity. So that's not an accurate question to ask. I think the better question would be to ask is, why does God speak to people as opposed to others? And because I am someone who God did speak to, and he actually spoke through me, but he did speak to me, and he did specifically say, if you're asking he did specifically say, I am Jesus Christ. So there's that. But if you were to ask me, why didn't God answer your prayer? Why didn't God speak to you? Well, that's where I'm going to revert back to the RHE and have the humility to say, I have no idea. To me, if you're asking me, Adam, it is completely unfair. At least 20 times, I would say, in my life, God has intervened in some sense of the word, either doing a miracle in front of me, speaking to me, or doing something else that is speaking to me via other people. One time I was just at an event and someone just called me up and told me my whole life. And so if that's happened to me 20 times and you haven't experienced that to me is beyond egregiously unfair. And in my opinion, I would honestly even say immoral. So I couldn't really answer that question. I mean, if you talk to me, I'm not arrogant about the fact that God did speak to me. It's humbling. But it's also made me feel like garbage a lot of times, because I think if God has intervened in my life 20 years, like I would think I'd be floating around and walking on water and not sinning at all. But that's just not the case. I'm daily wake up and make mistakes and do stupid stuff on a daily, hourly basis that I know better to do, and I still do. So I can't understand why God would give me a message and speak to me when I'm such a flawed person. Let's just say that much. So I really cannot fully answer that. It's one of those things I'm about to say, I just do not know. What would qualify as evidence for you to believe in God?
Evidence for me to believe in God is probably experiencing something that you've experienced yourself. I think for some people it may take a feeling and maybe a feather floating by at the same time, simultaneously happening. I mean, some people believe in God for the simplest of reasons like that. I'm a little harder to convince than that. I mean, I've probably had experiences in my life where I could have mistaken them for God, I believe. When we're reflecting, when we're on our own, most of our ideas about the universe and our existence, they come when we're on our own and we're reflecting and we're thinking about our lives. This may, by some, be mistaken for God speaking to them. For me personally, to answer your question, I think a clear conversation in some way, maybe something that you've experienced, I think that would do it.
So I'm not sure if I've told you this story, but I'd actually went into the Philippines to participate in the sex tourism industry, and I wound up getting really convicted that I did that, and I stopped and I went in, I volunteered in the slums, and I gave away all my property. And when I went to the airport, I had to pay an exit fee, and they wouldn't take my credit card, and it became very obvious that I was going to miss the flight. And as I went to leave, like, God spoke to me and he said, look in my bag one more time. I unzipped my bag, and there was the exact there was one coin and one note that was the exact amount that I needed. So when I got into the plane, I said, beyond any reasonable doubt, I know that God exists. But I literally told God, I said, I know you exist. I don't give an F if you exist. F you. And I'm not going to serve you no matter what you do. So in my own opinion, if I got another chance after that, and he hasn't spoken, that to me, I can't even begin to tell you how unfair I would think that would be, because he could have and he should have just destroyed me in that moment, because he proved himself to me. And I said, I don't care if you exist or not. I literally said, I don't care if you exist. So that being said, I'm not entirely sure, one, why he hasn't or ever will reveal himself to you. One. Two is that, okay, so two, if he would reveal himself to you and you didn't want to believe, like me, you're just not going to believe in that. You're not going to believe in him. So one of my favorite is concerning God. One of my favorite quotes is, when a man truly believes, no evidence is necessary. And when a man does not believe, no evidence will suffice. So in that sense, I do, first of all, I do think that God, in a general, the Bible talks about like a general revelation. He's given us a conscience. He's given us a mind. And the fact that we live in such an amazing universe is in itself one proof of God. Second of all, this is a bit deep, but 2 months after becoming you can see the whole story, but 2 months after being a believer, I was allowed to see what I will call it hell. It wasn't the hell that you might imagine, but it was a total separation of God and his goodness for all eternity. And what I mean by that was I was literally stuck inside of my front yard for, I literally felt like a billion years passed by. And I was separated from any human being, any warmth, any light, any food, and just stuck there. And did you ever see Black Mirror?
Oh yeah.
Did you ever see White Christmas?
I've seen all of them.
Okay, so
White Christmas. Remind me. I mean, I loved them. They're fantastic. I want to leave them alone for as many years as possible. They were that good and
they're amazing.
Fresh. So, remind me of the White Christmas.
So, this guy winds up getting like simulated, and he winds up getting stuck in like a snow globe for like a million years. Actually, they wind up simulating him, and he winds up experiencing time on the rate of 1,000 years for every minute. And the end, he's like stuck in this snow globe, and he just stuck inside of his house or stuck inside of the kitchen. Well, I literally, when I saw that, I was like, that is the craziest thing ever, because that is like literally exactly what I experienced. So it was one of those things that you see in a horror movie where someone walks in and they see someone freaking out. They're like, what the heck happened? And then everything changes. So, but that being said, I think just seeing light, just seeing your daughter's face, experiencing sex, to me, that's one of the ultimate reasons I know why God exists. He just created sex. Like, you really think sex is going to magically appear out of nothing? And there's so many things that God's given us that I think he has proven himself. I do think that he remains hidden for a reason, so that we have an experience to be separated from him for a while, because of the fact that The Bible describes heaven, as it says, there's no sun in heaven because God's light is just everywhere. So if you're in that circumstance, if you're born in that circumstance, you would never doubt that God exists, and you would never be able to do any wrong in that situation, because as soon as you go to steal something or hit someone, like, you're just going to see God's right there all the time. So I do think God gives us this experience for a reason, and I think it's a part of the next level of consciousness that we need to get to Him. So yeah, I do think there's a purpose and there's a rhyme and a reason for it.
Do you not think that other people may have experienced a similar journey to what you experienced, but didn't find God and didn't relate their growth as something spiritual or religious? Do you think that other people could have had pretty much the same experience as you have had in your life without religion?
So if you know about me, you know, I think I've told you already, I'm tattooed with all the world religions, right?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, head to toe, I got them all. And that being said, definitely one of the things I have the biggest problem with inside of Christianity, and I know that this is not entirely true the way that you might imagine it, but it's like this exclusivity with Jesus. Like, okay, it's either Jesus or you're going to go to hell forever. That does cause me problems to think in those terms, because I do know that there's, like, one of my best friends is Muslim. I know plenty of great atheists like yourself. I couldn't imagine for the life of me, like, God punishing you and sending you to hell for all eternity because He didn't reveal Himself to you, you know, or He did and you weren't wise enough to understand it. And then there's people who are just born into Hinduism. So, I mean, that being said, if you take a look at the source material, it definitely gives a lot of inclinations, indications. One is that the Bible says that God has given us a conscience. Okay, so if you are true to your conscience and you've never heard the name of Jesus Christ, the Bible says that, like, you're justified because God has given you a conscience. Okay, and if you never heard the name of Jesus Christ, well, how in the heck would he be able to judge you on that standard, right? Jesus gives this amazing analogy where he says, or parable, and he says, so there's two sons. Okay, one of the sons says, oh, he tells them both to do a task. And so one of the sons says, no, I'm not going to do that. And he, like, goes away. And the other son says, okay, yeah, I'll do it, which would be analogous to a Christian, right? But then the son who says, I'll do it, doesn't wind up doing the task. And the son who says that I wouldn't do it, he does do it. So Jesus asks a rhetorical question here. He says, who would be justified in that scenario? It's quite obvious, the person who did the right thing, right? So in that sense, there's plenty of other indications, like plenty. I could give you probably a dozen of them, that the idea that you think, okay, you're just going to be a Christian and you're going to go to heaven and have, like, first of all, there's going to be a lot of Christians who wouldn't get into heaven by the Bible standards, okay? Jesus even says this. He said, a bunch of Christians come to him at the end, and he says, basically, get the hell out of here. Like, literally, get the hell out of here. And they're like, why? Like, he's like, oh, because whenever I was homeless, whenever I was a foreigner, whenever I was in the hospital, like, you didn't help me. And they're like, what the heck? You were never in the hospital. Like, you were never in prison. And he's like, well, with the things that you didn't do, like that homeless guy over there, that was like me. He says, whatever you've done unto those people, you've done it unto me. And whatever you didn't do to those people, you didn't do unto me. So you take all this information about the gospel and what Jesus is talking about, it's very clear. You will definitely see that there's going to be people who maybe don't have the title of Christian who are going to get into heaven. And there's going to be a lot of damn Christians who are going to go before Jesus, and Jesus is going to say, hey, you were anti-immigrant and I was an immigrant. You try to cut people off of healthcare, and I was out giving people free healthcare. And you put profit over people.
I think Trump's going to have a bad time if you're right, mate. Let's be honest.
Yeah. As a Christian, he violated literally like 99% of everything I believe in as a Christian. So I don't see how.
But he refers to God so much. Wow.
Mm-hmm. There's a great episode. I want to post a link in this where Gary Busey is like, he's faking being a, you know Gary Busey? He's an actor.
I know the name. I definitely, I don't know the face. I've seen movies with him in.
So he's pretending to be a faith healer, and he has like, he's doing all these fake miracles just to get money, right? But then this alien comes down and he sees him and he's like, the alien's like, I want you to train me to be a faith healer because I want to take over the, and I don't think he tells him this initially, but he realizes in the process that the alien wants to take over the world, and he sees like religion as the #1 way to do it, to get control over people. I'm going to post a link to it so you can check it out. It's really good. Do you think you have to commit personal moral dishonesty to believe in everything popping into existence in the world when you know that nothing exists in the universe? You know this already, this concept that it's not possible to have nothing. You know that the concept of nothing is, I'm sure you know this by now at this point, that it's not possible. So do you, and it's fine if you do, I have to commit a certain level of moral and intellectual dishonesty to believe in some of this stuff. Like, I'll just be honest, that's where the humility is going to come in and saying this. But
okay.
Do you find, does that cause you like any sleepless nights, or what are your thoughts?
No, because the idea of the universe always existing is a bit like, to me, is a bit like believing that God always existed. It's no different to me. So I think it holds the same sort of weight, but it's shifted. But obviously you would shift that to God always existing, creating the universe. So for me, I can't see the difference between the two.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Okay.
I'm not saying this is the case. I'd probably get burned at the stake for even mentioning this, but I have said, look, I don't know and you don't know, but maybe the Big Bang actually did happen, and maybe God evolved, and then maybe he mastered physics, and then maybe he time traveled to the beginning and started it. If you ask me to explain God,
hey, that makes more sense to me.
No, but there's no way I can explain it. There's no way I could possibly. I mean, I've thought of that scenario.
But that would make more sense because, well, it just would.
I'm not saying that's the case.
No, I know, but it's a nice idea. I've not heard of that one.
Because I invented it. That's why. That was my. You know, I live in South Korea, right? So what if I told you tomorrow you saw me in the Yukai? You guys don't say K. You say Kai. The Yukai. And you saw me there, and I'm like, good day, mate. Let's do another shrimp on the bobby, right? And you're like, how in the heck did you get here? And how can you speak British so amazingly, right? That's what you're going to say. And I'm like, oh, I flew here. And you're like, oh, yeah, like, which airline did you take? And I'm like, no, I physically flew here. You wouldn't even probably respond to that. You'd probably call the bobbies to come get me out of your place, right? So imagine, same scenario. And I said, yeah, I took the ocean. And you're like, okay, like, that's really quick. Like what kind of boat did you use? And I'm like, no, like I physically swam here. So both of those scenarios happen. You know, but they're both absolutely impossible, right? Which one would you be more likely to believe in?
The swimming, for sure.
Okay, because at least you know I can swim. Well, you know I couldn't cover that distance in that time, but you know that, hey, if one of those have to be true, that's probably the one you're going to go with, right? So this is my analogy, the way that I try to think of this. Like, if you're saying something infinite happens, is there something is infinite, and I say, well, clearly something infinite cannot pop out of nothing. Okay, we know that. I don't need a reason. I don't need to try to reason that, because nothing, if nothing exists, then there something. They say, like, even the singularity that allegedly caused the Big Bang, that would have to be something. So nothing could have ever existed, right? So
nothing, no, for sure.
So if you're telling me that an infinite, like the universe is infinite, well, I'd say, well, if someone masters the laws of physics and they master whatever, and they're able to do this like God, that's at least possible. I'm pretty possible. That's me swimming to the UK, is what I would say. It's slightly more believable. It's equally as preposterous. It's slightly more believable.
It's not preposterous. It's not as preposterous as you're saying, because our minds and our bodies are in the environment that we live in.
Mhm.
And that's not to say there could be some of the conscious with other, whether it's spiritual or physical, that was in a different environment, that did master physics, that was able to make waves and make things happen. So it's not quite as crazy as.
Here's what would be a more reasonable scenario. Okay, let's say the Big Bang happened, and the outcome is a very small area, because it couldn't be infinite. It's not possible to have infinite, right? Because it's a very small area. And again, life evolved, and then we were put in a simulation that had infinite. And that's the only way we're able to experience infinite. That's another scenario. Again, I just made it up in my mind. But that would be, if you're telling me infinite exists, I would have to believe that scenario over, that this is a simulation, over that it all just came to nothing and just there was nothing. And
I
then
agree with that.
So, but I don't know.
Something coming from nothing is not. Yeah.
I don't know. I'll be the first to say I don't have the slightest idea.
Well, I don't think things come from nothing. I mean, you can't. Nothing isn't anything. So how can something come from something that's not there?
Right.
It has to come from something. So it started something, and therefore is. Yeah.
And that concept is as elusive to me as the letter is R to Brits. I got a mic right here, and I'm gonna drop it and cause a little ripple effect. Do you think atheists are by and large more moral and or smarter than theists?
That's difficult because I don't know many Christians, and I don't know. I probably know 5% of the people I know are religious, so that would be unfair for me. I must say though, the religious people that I do know are far from stupid. I mean, look at you. I mean, you're not that daft, are you? Let's be honest.
Slightly. Well, compared to you, I am. I mean, compared to you, I'm not. I'm a genius compared to you, but I'm being cheeky.
Cheeky. But no, I think that's a difficult one for me to answer, because I don't know many Christians. I don't associate with many Christians. As I've said to you before, I have been to the local church, and I live in a small town. There are no young people there in that church. That's not to say that there isn't, in some cities, lots of young Christians. But in areas like this, it's there aren't many.
So I will say this, then I'll answer from my perspective. I would say yes, definitely atheists are. One, the Bible predicts it. It says that God's chosen the foolish things of the world to overcome the smart things. And in fact, he chose me. I mean, you couldn't get much more of a fool than Isaiah Perez after having an experience like I did and saying, I don't care anyway. That takes an idiot to do something the way that I did, an absolute fool. But I mean, that being said, if you stop at the Bible and say, like, this is all I need to know, it's going to prevent some serious scientific inquiry, In fact, the Vatican Church has stopped a lot of scientific inquiry over the years. So the advantage that the atheist has is to have these questions that they can't answer, and so it makes them search. Whereas Christians are like, oh, we got all the answers. There's no need to search anymore. So in that sense, yes. Second of all, I do believe that atheists are more moral people, but the explanation I have is probably totally different than anything that you might think, because it has been consistently my perspective, it's been consistently my experience that Christians do, myself included, do some very immoral things and act very inconsistently with what they believe in. But that being said, there's a couple of things. One, the shame that you get a lot of times with being a Christian is enough to demoralize you pretty dang bad, you know? So because it's just the reality is you recognize you don't live up to this. So if you don't have that, as an atheist, it frees you up, at least in the more permanent moment, to more be yourself and to be comfortable with accepting yourself. So you're less likely to, I would say this, that you're less likely to engage in the kind of cognitive dissonance that you have to do a lot of times as a Christian to go to church, you know, and say, oh, I've got this great thing, I'm looking great. Like that takes a lot of energy to prop up like a hologram version of yourself. And you feel like you have to do that as a Christian. I know I had to do that, and I don't do that anymore because I'm very honest about my shortcomings and all that stuff. But you can be
way
yourself.
Easier, man.
What?
It's got to be way easier.
What is?
Accepting your forthcomings.
Mm-hmm.
Much
Definitely.
easier way of living, for sure. Yeah.
I had a whole other personality, split personality that had to be around my family. I mean, it was what you know. You want to relate with me. I suffered such depression as a kid that I completely blacked out my whole window to where you couldn't even see my hand in front of my face, and I would literally cry in my room for sometimes 2 or 3 hours, and then I would have to go to church and I have to wash my face off in cold water and just go and be the pastor's son, pretend like everything's all right. And that actually really made me hate my father. It really fueled my alcoholism in my life. And I would get drunk overseas and just drink so I could call up my dad and tell him these things that I hated about him and I hated about religion. I literally didn't talk to him for years. And now my dad is like literally like my best friend on the planet. Finding Jesus Christ and finding the forgiveness that I got from God, it gave me the ability to forgive myself and to forgive my dad. And yeah, we couldn't have any better relationship, honestly. You know, the other thing real quick is that I do want to say this is the reason why I do think that atheists can be more moral people most of the time. Obviously not every time, but generally speaking. I met a really lot of bad atheists on internet. I mean, look, I'm talking to one of them right now. No,
Badass.
But ours. But ours. So it's because I positively, and I know this is just going to be from, if you haven't experienced this, then there's nothing I would tell you that would convince you of this fact. But I have experienced the dark side of the universe, man. Positively, I would strap a TMT bomb around my daughter and take a lie detector test and tell you what I've experienced, because I'm so 1 billion% positive. And I wouldn't ever put this out there unless I had experienced. I've made a whole video about it, but I have experienced that there is what you guys might call like a problem of evil. It's actually a much bigger problem for an atheist to answer. As Christians, we can answer the question, but from an atheist, one of the things I found most startling about doing this podcast, and we've had great talks, right? Like totally respectful, totally great. But one of the things that's disturbed me the most is that atheists can't definitively say what's evil, all right? They really can't. And so most of the times I'm not saying this is the case with you, but it's happened more often than not that they've had to say, I'm either agnostic on the concept of evil, or I don't believe that evil exists. And when I went to Cambodia and I saw pagodas stacked up with human skulls, or when I went to North Korea and I saw the oppression there of the North Korean people, I could feel evil. I could say those are the only 2 times I've ever physically felt evil. It was in Cambodia, and you see the torture devices that they use to torture people there. There's a whole museum on it. And to see what it's done to the North Korean people, you know, I've been there twice. And that caused a huge conflict of interest in my life because I couldn't reconcile that inside of my atheism, why I thought that was wrong. I'm like, in my evolutionary survival of the fittest, dog eat dog, this actually makes sense. Social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. Kim Jong-un is more advanced than these people, and he's using them like I would use a pig or a sheep. And And I'm not saying you couldn't reconcile that. I'm telling you, Isaiah Perez couldn't reconcile that. So in my own mind. So I was like what I would call myself a deist. Like I was like, you exist, F you, and I'm going to do everything I can to go against you. But ultimately, I had too many conflicts of interest. One, I couldn't believe that stuff popped into existence. And second of all, is that I needed a way to appeal that what Kim Jong-un was doing was wrong. And I couldn't find that I could do that inside of atheism. Maybe you can do it. I'm not saying you don't. And I'm not saying you don't value human life. That's not my argument. But I'm saying Isaiah Perez could not wrap his mind around that one.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen similar things in Spain. Actually, I saw some torture devices in Spain at a museum, and it was horrible to see them. Obviously, because they've clearly been used, and they're very old, and they've got wear on them. You know, where they've been used so many times. And from that, I think I just felt lucky, I guess, to not have been around in those times, whether it be in Spain or anywhere in the world, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some places in the world now where obviously you wouldn't want to find yourself being in, you know. It's not so much a time thing, it's a geographical thing as well. And I think it just made me feel quite fortunate, actually, seeing those devices.
Well, you know, and those were used by the Spanish church during the Inquisitions and against Jews and what they would call pagans. So I fully understand why. I fully understand the criticisms that atheists have on religion. You know, I really do. Why do people naturally have a God-shaped hole in them? Why do people always make different and complex religions, no matter where they are? You could separate people from all over the planet, and you go and you find someone, you know, down in Tahiti or the Easter Islands. You find these extremely complex, and that's what baffled me as a deist, atheist, agnostic, whatever I was at different times, was that I thought that was so fascinating. And there's a reason why I got all the world religions tattooed, because I thought that was just an amazing expression of humanity, that we're looking for, it's a rock or a frog or some complex deity, some jackal in Egypt or whatever. It baffled me. It absolutely baffled me that people are trying to find meaning. So what is your opinion on that?
Well, that's one of the main problems I got with religion. I think a lot of the stories in the Bible are supposedly found everywhere, and they've been used by other religions. And one of those where I think the story of Jesus, or the story of Moses, I think, was found in one of the pyramids. I mean, that's another main issue people have, atheists have with religion. You know, why are there so many? And why do they, you know, why would, if God was, if he was real, why would he allow that? Why would he allow all the confusion and people to be misled and feel faith? I mean, their faith may be, if God exists, their faith may be real, but they're just maybe not wise enough to see, or smart enough to see that they're just confused, they're following the wrong God.
So, but my question specifically is, I'll answer that question next, but from my own perspective, I have a little bit of unorthodox positions on that. But why do you, like, what does that say about humanity if everyone there wants to have some kind of meaning? Like, I mean, you could say it's like wish fulfillment. I get it, if that's what you want to say. But,
so you're asking why so many people are, if God
everybody,
does not exist, why are they generating?
Everybody.
Comes from an anxiety or a lack of understanding, or, I mean, as an atheist, I feel happy. The thing, as an atheist, I've learned, the more I learn, I realize, I think it happened about 5 years ago. I was every day I was obsessing about learning, and now I still like to learn and research, but I do it in a healthy way. And I think I got to the stage where I realized that the more I learn, the more I realize there's so much I don't know, you know, which is quite unsettling. And I think that a lot of people struggle with coming to terms with not knowing, or maybe just having an end and that's it. I think that answers your question.
Well, I appreciate the honesty. I definitely do. I need to get some kind of counter on here that says how many times I've said I don't know in this podcast. It's been a lot. Part of the respect is for me to respect you and give you undue respect. But no, really, if I do respect you, then one of the ways I can do that is to be honest with you, okay? And to say the things that I don't know and to not give you BS, bull, you know what answers. So one of the things that upsets me the most about Christians, there's many things. One is that they don't live according to Jesus's words. That's probably number one. But number two is they make really stupid and illogical arguments that aren't scientific. Try to say like the world 6,000 years old. That's one of the worst ones. But you know, or evolution didn't happen, or the Big Bang did. All of these things that there's a lot of scientific proof to show that, and yet they wanted to say we're going to hold to this very limited and literal interpretation of the Bible. And speaking of the Bible, I'm going to give you my interpretation of that, of why there's so many religions. Because if you take a look at the book of Genesis 6, what happens in that story is angels come down from heaven and start having sex with the women. And so this produces like a hybrid of people. And the Bible actually talks about them as like they call them the heroes of old. Okay, it's a very interesting expression. So I'm not saying this is the case, but I think it's reasonable, maybe even logical, to maybe use a bit of a deduction in this story and say it is very possible that the stories of like Hercules or Greek mythology, that some of these characters might have actually existed and people thought that they were gods. Certainly, if you read the book of Ezekiel and you read some of the descriptions of angels, if you saw one of those things, you would think it's a god, positively, without any reasonable doubt. One of these characters is like a lion and has a human face. The back of his head, he has like an eagle's face. And to the other side of his face, so he has like 4 faces. One of them is like a bull. But if you were to see something like that, you might think it, depending on what side he saw it on, you might think it's a griffin, or you might think that it's something that would be like on a sphinx, you know? So that, of course, raises another question, like, why would God allow that? And I think that's kind of like the point. God allows these things to happen so that people are deceived, and that he is ultimately shown to be the truth out of all of these things were like copies. So here's another example. I think it's very well could be the case that the story of Christ first and foremost took place in heaven. Okay, so if you're going by the source material, then these demons come down later on and they're trying to confuse people. Okay, they're trying to invent different religions. They're trying to get people from serving God. So if they told stories of like Mithras, you know, Mithras is where they get December 25th and all that, you know, if they wanted to get people to not believe in Jesus, a very smart way to do would be to incorporate elements of Christianity, but then like muddy the waters, like give half truths. So for me, I mean, first and foremost, I really do not know the answer to that question. I would say if you read the book of Enoch, which the book of Jude actually quotes the book of Enoch. So a lot of Christians and Jewish writers believe that that book was actually true, but it gives the whole backstory of how these demons came and they're having sex with women. And they even teach women how to have abortions, actually. And they teach them about astronomy and astrology. And they teach people about all kinds of stuff like war and weapons. They teach them how to fight. And it's definitely answers that question. It does raise some more, I would say, where you kind of just have to use some guesswork. But I will say this, speaking of astronomy, the Bible, a lot of Christians don't like this fact, but there's a lot of astronomical things that are going on in the Bible. You know, the fact that Jesus has a fish and was born in the year 0 is a matter of the changing of the astrological signs, the age of Pisces, and you know it coincides with the birth of Jesus. So you have this, and then you have like the Taurus, which was several thousand years before Jesus Christ, and you wind up having them worshiping like cows and bulls. And so even in the story of when Moses comes down and he finds them worshiping a goat, oh no, I'm sorry, a bull. Moses comes down, he finds them worshiping a bull. Like there's astrological significance to that, you know, or you know what I'm saying? The fact that there's 12,
yeah.
the fact that there's 12 tribes, that there's 12 constellations, that there's 12 disciples. Like there's a lot of, there's this whole like, okay, you can't talk about astronomy or astrology if you're a Christian, but if you look at Jesus Christ, like his birth, like wise men are coming, they're like, hey, we see this guy's sign up here, which maybe was like a supernova, because a supernova happened in the year 3, that actually found the records in China, which would have been able to see from China and Israel, and it happened. And so the calendar is a little bit off, so it actually does align, because it says to have happened somewhere in April, and that's likely the time that Jesus was born. So there's some stuff going on there. You have, you know, as I said, you also have the age of Aquarius, which is hinted at right before Jesus, right at the Last Supper. Jesus says, go look for these people, this guy who's carrying like these waters. And it just happens to be the next sign, the next age is going to occur. So you have the Jews, again, they're blowing the horns in the time where it's the astrological age of, I think, Aries. I'm sorry, Aries. And that exists for like 2,500 years before Jesus Christ exists. So these things are like, they align, you know, they make sense, that God's like giving us hints. And, you know, I don't think he wants us to know the whole picture right now. And I would definitely say I don't know the whole picture. So
sure,
that's kind of just, I'm just throwing some stuff out there.
You just reminded me of something else that I saw a while ago now about the sun, or the story of Jesus Christ.
Zeitgeist, probably.
Being about the sun, the sun rising, and the North Star, and you know, the sun rose from the darkness, and you know, is it Zeitgeist? Or there was Zeitgeist. Yeah. And I think this is where the whole finding the stories on pyramids and things, I think, is on the same thing. But no, it's interesting. It is interesting. So,
what do you think are the worst elements of Christianity and atheism? And do you think that atheism or secular humanism or social Darwinism can lead to, or will inevitably or possibly lead to, people like Pol Pot or Kim Jong-il or Stalin, because they actually hold on to the survival of the fittest? Like to be quite frank, I find Nazism to be 100% more consistent inside of the realm of atheism than inside of theism, because you have a master species, survival of the fittest, who feel a right to go. It's the same way like when you see the bees and the hornets and they come in and they wipe everyone out. The ants will do that. They'll have their colonies and then they'll go wipe out all the other colonies around them to have dominance. So it seems to make more sense. I'm not saying you're a Nazi or anything like that. As I said, my position is atheists more often than not are more moral. But I'm just saying that seems like it could be particularly susceptible to fascism. What do you think?
I think that it's trying to disconnect morals with God, isn't it? I mean, morals. I mean, I don't believe in God, and you know, if I tell somebody a lie, I feel awful, not because God's watching me, but because of my morals. And I think that I find it difficult to connect morals. I know it's kind of a weird thing to say for some people, but I find it very difficult to connect morals with God, because I think we've all got morals without religion or without God. Just the same as somebody that doesn't really have many morals, maybe a Christian. You know, I find that very difficult to connect the two things. Would they be more susceptible to that kind of? I think it's quite unusual that. I think it's very unusual that North Korea is not religious. Like, very unusual. Because more often than not, you'll see control by religion. So it's very unusual. But it's hard to know. As an outsider, I mean, we watch documentaries about it. We know what they do to the people. Well, you know,
I've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, you've been there, you've seen it firsthand. But then that's to say, it's a bit like saying, to us, it's morally wrong. But are there people in North Korea that absolutely love their lives and see it completely moral and quite happy to have no religion and follow the Kims? You know, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it?
So I think that's one of the weakest things, and I would say then just the total lack of moral absolutism, and everybody just create their own. Because I know you're a good bloke, but if you take a look at someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, you know Jeffrey Dahmer? He was a cannibal in America. He killed a lot of people, like 17 people, and he's eating them and stuff.
Sure.
And he said that his atheism, he said that he was going to church and he was stopping, like he was trying to stop what he was doing, but his atheism said, I don't have any moral accountability. And the fact that he would eat another human being, I would say, if that's what you believe, I could see the slippery slope. And I don't believe, trust me, I do not believe you would do that or other people would do that. But I'm saying you don't have a grounding, you don't have a footing to tell someone like that objectively, you know, that they're killing someone who has meaning or purpose or value. Because at the end of the day, if we all just came out of nothing, then we're just like amoebas, you know, we're just evolutionary. People die and people get wiped out all the time. So if I kill one person, hey, there's another 7 billion more. You know what I mean? It's harder to justify. It's harder to justify telling someone objectively that they shouldn't do that. You can say, I don't believe he should. I mean, you could add him. I'm sure if you saw Jeffrey Dahmer, you would say, hey, secular humanism is the right way to go. You should value people. I do believe, and I do believe you're a good bloke. It's not my argument. I'm saying, if you had something like a Bible to appeal to and say, the book of James says you shouldn't even curse somebody with your mouth because that person has been created in God's image. That's like the highest possible objective value of life, to say that this person is created in God's image, like human rights. You shouldn't even forget punching them or kicking them or killing them or raping them, whatever. You shouldn't even speak to them that way. So the fact that I could appeal to that, you don't have that. So that's, I just, if I was an atheist, that would be something that, because I was, and I'm telling you, when I went to North Korea, that's one of the things that stopped me and said, I got to rethink my thinking here, because I know that this is wrong. Doesn't mean I want to serve God, but I don't need anyone to tell me. I don't need to debate. I'm not going to debate whether or not this is right or wrong with anyone. When you see people exploited and abused like that, it's just, ugh. I'm going to post it.
Sorry. Yeah. You say right and wrong. Right and wrong. I mean, for me, because obviously right and wrong is, you know, laws, for example. You go to different countries, laws are different. Some may, you know, look at America. Morally, I don't think it's right to kill anybody, whether they've killed anyone or not. And there's people that share that opinion in certain states. That's why they don't kill people if they've murdered other people. right and wrong and morals, it's difficult because they're different. I mean, there's people down the road here. It's a very, very peaceful town, this. But there's people down the road here would think it was completely fine to hit somebody because they didn't like what they were saying to them or something, you know. And we live up the road, and obviously we don't live that like that, you know what I mean? So, you know, right and wrong and morals, that it's so subjective from not only from country to country, but even from different places in the country. So it's difficult to. I mean, there's people. I'm not saying what's happening in North Korea is correct, but you might have some people that live in North Korea that say, you know, hey, keep out of this. You know, my family are happy with this arrangement. Why would you even consider getting involved? We're not being abused. We're happy. You know what I mean? I mean, there must be people that live in North Korea that are happy. There must be people. Well, I mean, surely that, you know, I mean, logically, whether or not that's through because it's right or wrong, you know.
So I've interviewed North Korean refugees who have seen babies literally pulled from their mother's hands and stomped to death in front of them. They literally saw it, and they literally seen cannibalism. And I've made these videos available on my my missions channel because part of what I am doing down here is bringing attention to this these human rights abuses. So
sure,
I understand what you're saying to a degree, but again, my thing, I'm telling you why your argument is so weak, why being an atheist is so weak, is because you don't have an objective. You just have to say, well, it's objective. Hey, if they want to commit genocide, if they want to enslave the people, well, hey, it's their country, it's their culture. Who are we to really say? So, and you're not to be blamed for that. You didn't create atheism. You didn't create morality. You know, that's not. It's a burden that's placed upon you. And I will say this, like, okay, you may or may not believe the kind of things that I had, the experiences and my experiences with the supernatural, right? Because part of what you have to say as an atheist is that this supernatural element doesn't exist. Okay, even though I'm almost, I would bet money you positively know evil exists, and you know that there's some kind of evil force out there. I would put money on that fact that you may not want to say it's a devil or demons or anything like that, but you know, if you take a look 2 minutes around, like, forget arguing for a second, just take 2 seconds around the world and take a look at the kind of human trafficking, the kind of abuse that takes place, and then look at me in the eye and say, I don't believe that there's an evil force that's. I mean, if you can do that. If you could do that as a father,
can I answer it in a different?
No, you can't. That's the final point, and you've been defeated. I 1776 to you. I rose up and we kicked out the Brits.
You got the declaration sorted, didn't you?
Go for it. Go for it.
You mentioned ants earlier, didn't you? And you mentioned that they, you know, get a colony and they'll just go and wipe the others out and just, you know. Would you call that evil?
Sure.
You call it evil?
Sure. Animals behave in evil ways. Yes, absolutely.
What if their survival depended on wiping these colonies out? I mean, do you think it would be evil to wipe the others out and survive, or do you think that they I mean, obviously surely they don't have reasoning. These ants, they know that there's limited supplies and they're going to die. So, you know, what choice do they have? Is that evil?
Wiping out. I mean, obviously they can't reason with the other people or the other ants or the other things.
Yeah, like ration or something, you know.
Right. They can't. They lack that. Fighting for your survival. I mean, that kind of justification, just so you know, is exactly what caused Japan to come over here, invade South Korea, and say, "Hey, our land's sinking, so we really need to go into the Philippines, and we really need to kidnap and rape hundreds of thousands of women." And I know you're talking about animals, but that justification can be used amongst humans because that's literally Japan sits so low, every year it falls like a couple centimeters. And because of their mountains that are in there, they have a very limited area where they can farm or build houses or structures like that. So
that's why they live underground, most of them.
What I'm saying,
they're trying to dig down. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. What I'm saying is that justification that we need to do this because our survival, it was used to invade and massacre millions of, like, literally, Japanese killed tens of millions of people in World War II, you know, and their crimes just they're not considered at the same level as Nazis, but they had some really, really, really warped justification, like what you said. But, you know, to answer that question, I don't know. I really don't know how to say that. I mean, I do believe that, yeah, animals don't have the exact inclinations.
So you think they're different? So you think they're different situations, and that the human situation is evil, and is that what you're saying? And the ant situation is not evil.
I don't think that they're. Yeah, I don't think that they're. They kind of just kill stuff, and they're like, all right, well, I got to eat. I got to go kill stuff. So it's not exactly. They don't like want to torture stuff, or you know what I mean, like this inclination that humans want to do, in that sense. But I understand the reason what you're saying with that as far as survival. You know, so like survival. Well, that's what the animal kingdom is: survival of the fittest. You know, it isn't necessarily evil the way that you and I might think about it.
A dear friend and his father ask you to end his terminally ill father's life in a humane but clearly illegal way. The reason they ask you is because if he dies the following day, they don't get a really, really big insurance payout, which can impact the entire family. Starvation, possibly. You know, I'll leave that to you. What do you do? Do you help end the life of a terminally man that's going to die the next day, or not, as a Christian?
So to answer the question, the first time I was in high school and somebody said, "What do you think about euthanasia?" I said, well, I'm pretty sure that euthanasia are pretty much like the youth in Africa or Europe or America. They're all the same. I actually literally said that. But to answer your question, well, first of all, if your question is about, do I believe in euthanasia, absolutely. So I believe it's extremely immoral to continually suffer, to continue allow someone to suffer or to torture them. So this is one of my biggest beefs with Christian theology of hell. Like, a lot of Christians seem to be perfectly okay with that. And I'm like, I just can't, my heart will never be okay with anybody suffering or anybody being in pain. So if the question is about euthanasia, I would say absolutely believe in euthanasia. I think it's immoral to cause more suffering than needs to be. And so if I were to commit euthanasia, as you're talking about, and I were to stand before God, I would have a completely clear conscience on the matter. Even if it was immoral, even if it was illegal, I would ultimately say, you've created these sicknesses and you've created these circumstances. And if I'm trying to relieve some of it and I'm not being malicious about it, so I think that's what it comes down to, intent. And I don't see the intent of euthanasia to be malicious. So that's why I would be completely 1,000,000% okay with it. A lot of Christians aren't okay with euthanasia. I am. And it is actually one of the reasons why I'm pro-choice, because these children are being born into situations where they're not wanted. And if I think about what's going to happen with their life as a result of that, I would say it's probably better to be aborted and to go up into the presence of God than come down here and experience. I made a very foolish mistake one day, and I asked somebody about what is on the dark net. I really wish I wouldn't have asked that question, because he answered from some of the stuff that he saw. I mean, just out of pure curiosity, really wish I wouldn't have listened to that. Some of the stuff that people do to humans on the dark net, the most horrific. If I were to tell you some of the stuff that this guy said that he watched and liked to watch, you wouldn't be able to, you would not be able to sleep tonight. I can guarantee you that. You'd be tossing and turning, much less if you watched it, you know? But I would think a kid that's about to be aborted is more likely to end up on one of those videos that people are circulating around the internet. So I don't have, in that sense, I don't have the slightest sense of moral difficulty to be pro-choice, because I know, you know, my family adopted seven kids into our family growing up, and these people had some of the most horrific lives abuse from their own parents. If you know the kind of stuff that people's own parents do to their children, it's mind-boggling that people could be that evil to their own family, you know? So yeah, I'm sorry, that's kind of a long drawn out answer.
No, answer me.
I got last question. Which religion would you like to be true if you could choose anyone?
Probably. That's a very difficult question. If I had to choose a religion, I'd probably I'd probably be a
Buddhist.
No, I think a deist. I think, and more sort of, you know, our friend Justin. You know, the universe being God. I think I quite like the idea of God being everything and it being very uncomplicated, and no Bible and no laws and no rules, and you know, God is everything, and you know, we all. I mean, it'd be nice to have it would be nice to have the golden nugget of heaven at the end of it. Obviously, we can cherry pick this, right? Can't we?
So if you could choose, would there be a God in heaven? And obviously your opinion is irrelevant in this, whether or not there is or not, but I'm just saying on a personal level, if you could choose, would there be a God in heaven and afterlife or something like that?
100%. Yeah. I mean, heaven sounds great. I mean, it really sounds great. I mean, I would love to think that we're going to heaven. You know what I mean? I really would. It sounds amazing. Who wouldn't?
Christopher Hitchens, he says, thank God that there's not a heaven. So he said it's a celestial North Korea. So, you know, I was telling you.
I'm sure he wouldn't be saying that if he was sat up there right now.
I will say this. The Brits they produced the worst atheists, man. You had Hitchens, Dawkins, and that Stephen Hawking's guy. Those guys have done so much damage, man. You guys are some naughty guys over there. What are you guys putting in the tea? So we're at the end of this podcast. I'm sorry. I want to be culturally sensitive to you. We're at the end, and I don't think any one of these podcasts, I'm going to move you like into theist camp. I kind of raised some questions, some thoughts that maybe some stuff I don't fully agree with myself, but I'll be the first to admit I don't have all the answers. I mean, I'll be the first to admit like some stuff doesn't add up to me, and a lot of stuff I scratch my head. If I had hair, I would pull it out. So it's troubling, and but I think the right thing we can do right now is at least having conversations where we're talking. We don't have to agree. We can agree to disagree, and we can have respect along the way. And I very, very, very specifically chose the 3 letters in this podcast. And RHE is like re. So I call it rethinking differences. We have differences, but you know, at least having you is like looking at from another side and across the pond. I have another perspective. You know, when the scientists want to see how far a star away is, one of the many methods that they do is that they take a picture in a telescope and they literally wait 6 months and take the same exact picture again as the Earth is made of rotation. And what it does is if you take a look, you can kind of see the shift when you close your eyes back and forth, and you can see the shift. And they use some kind of advanced trigonometry. But the point of that is that they need to see it from 2 different perspectives. And so for me, having someone like you give your opinion and your thoughts. I mean, it's invaluable to me as a believer, and I truly hope that you learned something maybe new today.
100%, mate. Yeah, definitely. It's been a great chat. It always is. I definitely think that we need to move on and discuss suffering at some stage, because for me, that's my biggest that's my biggest subject with religion, I think. And we didn't really cover that so much. So yeah, it's been a great chat, mate. Same as usual. Plenty of respect and empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I said, we're never going to answer every question. You're on here every month. I would love to continue to talk and continue to learn and grow, and always respect, humility, empathy. And with that being said, we want to thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you back at the next episode of RHE Podcast. Good day, mates.